In this video, we're going to show you how to replace the oil cooler housing on your Chevy Sonic. This will be located on the front of the motor. Let's get started. Push on the top tab, pull straight back, remove the connector for the O2 sensor, pull this out of the way. Using an E12 socket, we're going to remove the bolts for the heat shield. Using an E10 socket, remove the bolts at the bottom for the heat shield. Remove the oil dipstick. We're going to remove the dipstick tube. Before you do this, be sure you have a collection bucket under the oil pan. Some oil may leak out. Pull straight out and remove the dipstick. It's held in with an O-ring. Remove the heat shield. Using a 10mm socket, remove the 9 top nuts for the exhaust manifold. Remove all of the top nuts. Using a 12mm socket, remove the 3 bottom nuts for the triangle. Pull the flex pipe down, out of the way, and out of the studs. Using an E12 socket, remove the bracket bolts for the catalytic converter. There's one more on the other side. I'm tucking in the O2 sensor wire so it doesn't get in the way. Using an E12 socket, remove the engine hooks from the front of the motor. Do the same thing on the other side. Remove the exhaust manifold. Remove the coolant reservoir cap. Remove the oil fill cap. Using a 13mm wrench, we're going to open up the petcock for the radiator. Drain the coolant. Once the coolant's done draining, close down the petcock. Snug it up. Using a 15mm, remove the oil drain plug. Before removing the oil drain plug, be sure you have a collection bucket under you. Let the oil drain. Once the oil's done draining, reinstall the drain plug. Torque the drain plug to 14 Newton meters. Remove the exhaust manifold gasket. Clean the surface with a clean rag. Using a razor blade, we're going to clean the mating surface. Clean any of the corrosion, dirt, or oil off. Go around the whole surface doing this. When you're scraping, do not scrape towards these ports, scrape away. With the mating surface scraped, we're going to take a clean rag and some parts cleaner and spray it on the rag. And then wipe down our surface. Using the key, push down on the neutral safety switch, pull the gear shift to neutral. Using an E10 socket, remove the 2 bolts for the coolant pipe. There's one more on the other side of the pipe. Remove the coolant pipe. Using an E10 socket, remove the bolts for the coolant pipe going to the water pump. There's one more on the bottom. Remove the 2 bolts. Using an E12 socket, remove the 5 bolts for the oil cooler. There's one more hidden on the bottom right corner. Remove the oil cooler housing assembly. Remove the coolant pipe from the old assembly. Remove the coolant pipe that's still on the engine. Remove the old O-rings off of the coolant pipes. Do the same thing on the other one. Install the new O-rings. Using the back side of my pick, I'm going to push the O-ring down into place, getting it fully seated. Go around and make sure it's totally even. The larger O-ring goes on the outside. Install the small O-rings. Using a razor blade or carbide scraper, we're going to clean the mating surface for the cooler housing. Do the same thing on the other side. Using a clean rag with some brake parts cleaner, clean the two surfaces. Install the coolant pipe into the new oil cooler housing assembly. Be sure it's fully seated. Grab the small coolant pipe. We're going to reinstall it onto the car. Install the coolant pipe back into the motor. Get the pipe fully seated. Remove the top left bolt. Install the oil cooler housing. Be sure it's fully seated on the coolant pipe. I'm going to get one bolt started on the right-hand side so it holds it for me. The bracket on this coolant pipe will be in front of our assembly. I'm going to go ahead and get that bottom left bolt started. Install the 2 bolts for the front coolant pipe. Install the top left bolt for the oil cooler assembly, making sure it's going through the bracket for the coolant hose. Go around and get all of the bolts started by hand. Don't forget about the one on the bottom right. And right now I'm just snugging these up by hand until they make contact with our oil cooler assembly. Torque the oil cooler housing bolts to 18 foot-pounds. I started on the right side in the middle, moving to the bottom right. We'll go around one more time, just double checking. Torque the E10 bolts to 71 inch-pounds. Install the coolant pipe into the assembly. Get the bolts started for the coolant pipe going to the thermostat. Snug the bolts down and torque them to 71 inch-pounds. Install the gasket for the exhaust manifold. Install the exhaust manifold into the vehicle. Install it onto the studs. Install the nuts. Get all of these started by hand. Using a 10mm wrench and an E7 socket, we're going to remove the nut off of the stud. Using an E7 socket, install the stud into the motor. Get this started by hand. Snug the stud down. Torque the exhaust manifold stud to 60 to 62 inch-pounds. Install the nut. Snug down all of the nuts. Torque the exhaust manifold nuts to 15 foot-pounds. Go around one more time and double check. Install the heat shield. Be sure to put the O2 sensor through the heat shield. Install the top right bolt for the heat shield. Install the dipstick tube. Get it lined up with the oil pan and get it fully seated. You want that O-ring all the way in. Install the bolt through the dipstick. Leave these top two bolts loose until you have the bottom two shield bolts in. Install the bottom two heat shield bolts. You may need to do some slight pulling or massaging to get the heat shield to line up. Snug the bolts down. Get them nice and snug. Install the dipstick. Install the engine hooks. Snug the bolts down. Torque the engine hooks to 15 foot-pounds. Torque the heat shield bolts to 15 foot-pounds. Install the O2 sensor connector. Push until you hear a click. If you don't hear a click, give it a pull. Make sure it's locked on. Install the bottom bracket bolts for the exhaust manifold. Get both bolts started, and then snug them down. Torque these bolts to 15 foot-pounds. If you can't get a torque wrench on it, do the best you can. Install the triangle gasket. Get it onto the studs. Install the flex pipe to the exhaust manifold. Install the nuts. Torque the exhaust nuts to 15 foot-pounds. Fill the engine with oil to the manufacturer's specification using the specified oil. Install the oil cap, it'll click into place. Fill the cooling system until you hit the max line at the reservoir. Start and run the car with the cap off. Do this for about 5 to 10 minutes or until all of the air bubbles stop coming out. Once the system is fully bled, Double check that you have the coolant at the max line on the reservoir and reinstall the coolant cap. Remove the dipstick, wipe it off the first time, reinstall, pull it back out. We want our oil to be in between these two marks. This is high, this is low. And you're good to go. Using a 24mm socket, remove the oil filter cap. Fully unscrew it. I recommend using a rag, reaching down, putting the rag under the cup, and pulling straight up. Install the oil filter. Get it started by hand. Get it snug. Torque the oil filter cap to 25 Newton meters.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.